Big Tootie 6515, and this video is a continuation of yesterday's efforts. What I made yesterday was this thing. I made a like a chest armor out of trash I found. See, it looks pretty cool, right? So basically, this front piece, the breastplate, I think is what you call it. I made it out of a platter, like a very heavy platter, very tough feeling platter I found in Goodwill. And this back piece I made from an ammo box. I cut off the sides and I used it for the side protection. Might be wondering why I made this. Oh yeah, by the way, I strapped it together with a karate belt, the orange one. I made this because, well, first of all, I made this as a, not this, but something like this as a project for my English class. It's called a passion project. And if I did that assignment, I would be, well, they gave me that assignment to exempt me from the other coursework, which is pretty cool. So anyways, I made this because I wasn't satisfied with what I made last time for the passion project assignment. It was a rushed job, and this one is more thought out, I would like to say. It's definitely an improvement from the other one. And I also made this because I just like armor. I like weapons, I like armor from like medieval times. Or just armor in general, I like it. I think I've always liked armor. There's also another reason is that this armor is you would probably be able to find in like the more apocalyptic, type universes. I've been looking all over YouTube and I just couldn't find anything like this. It's either like too professional or just low effort at all. Or maybe not low effort, but I just haven't seen anybody make armor from trash like how I am. So I want to act as that person to make armor out of trash in case anybody would want to, be inspired by stuff like this. And it's really easy too. Like the professional stuff, like who the heck in an apocalypse has the time to make that super realistic, super complex looking armor? Because in reality, like sometimes you have to make armor like straight, like real quickly. Like a peasant type armor, and this would, you would probably find this in that type of universe. I don't know, because in the apocalypse universe there's guns and stuff, so this armor is definitely not going to stop any bullets, and I don't really intend to make it bulletproof though. It's made from like modern trash, but with the purpose is to withstand like melee weapon attacks. And that's kind of the universe I want to, maybe think about and create one day. So, this armor is basically what those people would, be making for themselves, because the only thing they have to hurt each other are like sticks and stuff. And, metal is, last time I checked, pretty good at defending against sticks, and maybe a couple knives, maybe some fire. So yeah, this be what you would find there. And I already put this on. It fits pretty good, even though I pretty much eyeballed everything except for these. I actually put this against my chest and then I just felt, okay, where's my armpit at? Just go a little bit under the armpit and cut this off. Well, this platter originally had a curve down there and down here. Anyways, I cut off that curve and I use that curve to outline this easy. This completely eyeballed, which, you know, still turned out pretty okay. I did use my neck as a reference. You know, hammering it down until it's curvy. I did the same thing kinda with this. The top part, this curved part, it was originally flat, and I curved it down, and then, well, I noticed that I couldn't really fit my head here, so actually I put this part on top of my head, and then I felt, okay, how much would it take to cut? How much do I have to cut off for my head to fit through? And a little bit over that, so I could do it comfortably, and then yeah, it turned out like that. Just flat. I couldn't really curve it to match the curvature of my back, because if I did, these will go this way, and I don't really know how to, you know, avoid that. So I just left it flat. It's not too uncomfortable, so long as I have padding underneath. The sides I did manage to get curved up a little bit. It's pretty cool that the ammo box had this thing on it. I could like put a tool right there, but I mean, with this karate belt, you could also put tools in there as well, or weapons, and maybe in the back part as well. And as you can see, I held this all with rope, because with the other armor I made for the passion project, I use wire. Wire, but it's like some twine thing, and I put it through when I put the twine through the holes, and the only way I could tighten it is if I twist it. And then what I noticed by doing that is that it sometimes pushed this in too close and too tight, or I would end up breaking the twine, or if it was successful and when I put the armor on, the twisting was like not good enough, and it ended up coming out of the hole, and I was just kind of annoyed by that, so I just stuck with the rope instead. It works better. So for today's video, I want to be making the arms, like the pauldrons, the Rerebraces, and the elbows, and whether I should just stick it to this part itself or keep it separate. I think I'm just gonna stick it to the chest piece. I'm gonna be using for this. These are all from the previous project, but this is new because, like in the previous project, this was just strapped to my arm, just by itself, like that. And as you can see, there's no top protection. And originally, I thought I could just cut this like a triangle, like that, because that's how it is for globes, and then just bend those pieces inwards until like they form something round. Or I could do it like the samurai style and then just cut rows like that, and then this is just gonna cover that. It's gonna be like a scale or something. It's for samurai armor. But then I found this thing, And this thing's pretty round. I'm thinking maybe I could just cut this in half down and then use the two halves to put on top of these, and that would be the top protection. It's rounded. I would just hammer it out and round it to fit better. Yeah, I think I'm gonna use that old rice cooker pot combined with all this. With this, the elbow armor, it's pretty V looking. I think I'm gonna, flatten this bottom part a little bit more to actually fit my elbow better. The Rerebraces. I'm gonna change the Rerebraces, maybe make it tighter, I guess. Originally, this was all held together by these belts. I cut out these little slits here to run those belts through. I did the same thing for this one. See? Alright, now that I cut these in half, I'm gonna see if I can hammer this flat part up so it's like more rounded. So I managed to hammer this to be rounded, and I used this thing, the part that goes on like the knob of your truck. This is a part of this bolt thing that's in this garage. I use this thing to hammer some of these surrounded. It's not, perfectly rounded. But one thing I noticed from doing that is that, sure, like, this thing looks pretty cool now. Like, you could, like, look at this and, yeah, you could say this is shoulder armor. Or any of the other armors, but one thing I've noticed is that this thing is, well, originally when I cut it, it was no sparks. So, at that point, I already knew. This stuff is made of aluminum, and I guess I should have known. And the problem with that is that this is pretty, like, weak. Like, I can bend this with my hands. And if I were to get hit by, like, a heavy melee weapon on the shoulder, this stuff would dent and probably break instantly. So, I don't know if I should use this for shoulder armor. Maybe I'll just use this as like to be on the outside, on top of the true strong shoulder armor. Maybe that's the decoration. Or I should use this for something else. I don't know. Yeah, it would look pretty good if I just leave on the outside, and then if I do this, like right there, it will act as that second layer, that actual true protection. But this top part is still going to be unprotected. Maybe I could put like a piece of scrap material right here. I don't know. But yeah, it looks pretty good. Yeah, that's gonna work. Pretty sure it's gonna work. So I had to find a way to connect these to the actual thing. I'll connect these to that. Maybe trim off a couple pieces. Maybe trim off like something like this to make more room for, the bending motion. So I've managed to attach it to this thing by drilling holes on both of them and then running the rope through it and then tying it out on the outside. And then there's some movement. It's not perfectly rigid. It can move. Let's see, it can move a little bit. to be able to need some flexible stuff. Maybe I could act as it, and then maybe I should like cut along here, or maybe not, just leave it like that. And then all there's left is attach it to the chest piece now. Alright, let's see how that looks. Before I attach it to that, I think when I put this on as a test on my shoulder, I noticed that, yeah, this stuff, it hits the meat of my arm and it's kind of uncomfortable. So I cut this out to make room for, you know, the part of my arm that bends so it doesn't collide with it. And also cut the back part of this part off as well, because so yeah, if I moved it around on my arm and it fits better because I did that. And also before I attach it now, I also want to drill some holes onto here and back here and run some ribbon through it to act as a strap for it to attach to my arm. And instead of, I'm doing this because of the belt, instead of the belt, I can have a little bit more control as to how it's tightened, and the ribbon is way smaller, and I could, you know, repurpose that belt for something better. Tighten it without the buckle mechanism is what come into play. I'm gonna run the ribbon from, have a knot right here so it stays, run it through here, come back on this side, and it's gonna be hook at the end of it, and it's gonna hook into this area where there's also gonna be some ribbon or some rope, and it's gonna hook onto that and hopefully hold its place. So let's see if it works. I managed to attach it to the actual chest piece. Got the actual tightening mechanism, or you know, the way to tighten it figured out as well. So I drilled the 2 holes, and then I put this, I tied this rope here loosely so that there's some like, and then what you do on the, what I done on the other side is, hang on, I tied the ribbon on this side, and at the end of it I attach this bent nail to look like a hook. So let me get this. So you take the nail and then you see, so that it eventually would get into the hole, the rope, and it will get stuck there like that, and you know, so it's not loose on your arm anymore. And I attached it to the chest piece the same way, the ribbon just like that. I had it like a fingers, well, yeah, around like a finger's length space. It doesn't look like it, but you know, it's not super tight, it's just on there, just dangling. And I also changed out the chest piece sides tightening, I took out the karate belt and I changed it out for one of the leftover belts from the previous project. And yeah, you just tighten it like that. Easy, way easier than, or way better than just tying a knot instead. Yeah, this took a while to do. The pauldrons are done. The next up is the elbow armor and the rerebraces. I don't know how I'm gonna attach this to here. Well, this is, I should have trimmed this part off because this stuff is catching onto my gambeson, aka this flannel I'm wearing. So I might want to cut that off, and maybe if I can find some duct tape, I could, tape up the sharp edges so I don't have to worry about getting cut anymore. I can seal off the dangerous parts. I could just do it professionally, but nah. I'm a bit confused as to how I'm gonna do this, but I think I know how. So this part, I was saying all the pictures, there's another part right here and one right here. Making that piece with flattening this pipe, or maybe like cutting it like in half first so I can get more material. Not in half, but cutting a line along this way, then cutting it, flattening it, and then I can get more material coverage, and then I'll wrap that around this area and the other around this area. Like in all the pictures, they use like rivets and stuff, and I don't think rope is gonna be good for this. Rivets. So I'm gonna have to figure out a way to make that out of rope. I could probably do like use knots or stuff. Knots or something. And then there's also, like, I have no idea how I'm gonna attach it to this. Like, coming out this way. And the elbow then that means the elbow has to be right here. And attach one of the elbows points here, but then where's the other one going? There's nothing here for it to attach to. Much sense to attach it like this, because that's not where my elbow is. Yeah. Pretty confused about that, but let's see if I can figure it out. So, I cut off the pieces from the pipe, flattened it, and then drilled holes into them, and drilled holes into this part as well, and then ran the rope through. I decided to just reuse the slit I cut from before to, tie the rope around it, and surprisingly, I mean, it moves. Didn't really need to make any rivets, and I probably wouldn't have been willing to go through the trouble of making them anyways, so just using rope tying it, it's good enough. I did it for both of them. And then I did drilled holes at the end because I want to attach, so you know, I need it to be able to attach it to the actual pauldrons and the vambraces. So I took the pauldrons off so it's easier to like attach this to there. And another thing I did and am in the middle of doing is I cut the vambraces in half, and then I'm just gonna run rope through these holes to like snap them onto my arm, because just sliding them through it just keeps getting caught on my gambeson. So I'm just gonna snap these onto my arm directly and then just unsnap them when I'm ready to take it off. So hopefully once this is done, I'll figure out how to put this and this all together. I managed to attach it, the elbows to the vambraces. Yeah, I just to bypass limitations of the limitations of not having rivets, I just drilled 2 holes and then ran them through, and then I mean, it bends, you know, pretty okay. Just at the end is that it bends. I made 2 of them, and then with the cutting the vambraces in half, I tied them with my I tightened them together with with my hook technique. It's not perfect though. Like this one is hooking to this part, whereas this one is hooking to the actual rope. And plus, it's not even that tight. So in the end, it ended up being sliding through my arm instead of snapping it anyways. Because I'm not going to be able to snap it with this on now. So it was really kind of pointless to begin with. But yeah, I can slide my hand through this. I just have to like do this stuff so it doesn't get caught, just making it as smooth as possible. It fits. It's pretty snug. All there's left to do is to attach the pauldrons.